Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley Holben from Mobility International USA. And welcome back. We're doing a series on international student orientations, specifically how to make these programs accessible, inclusive of, and welcoming to international students with disabilities. And we're kind of looking at this as a cross-disability topic. But we're also very honored to have a presenter with us today who's going to be discussing his work with the deaf community of international students coming from around the world, well, specifically in this case, from sub-Saharan Africa. But I will let him discuss that a bit more. So I'd like to welcome Gregoire to our webinar series. Gregoire, can you just briefly introduce yourself and then tell us a little bit about this project that you work on, keeping in mind that we will have to wrap up shortly. So unfortunately, we'll only be getting a little taste of what you do, but I'm really looking forward to learning more. So Gregoire, take it away.
Just real quick, my name is Gregoire. Thank you so much, Ashley, for inviting me to be a part of this webinar. Again, my name is Gregoire Youbara. I'm faculty at Gallaudet University. It's a School of Language and Education and Culture. My field is foreign language, and my language of choice is Spanish. And I just mentioned before, just like Ashley mentioned before, I work with students from sub-Saharan Africa for a special project. And I'll expand more about that in my presentation. So once again, thank you for having me here. And I'm really happy to share my experience as a deaf individual and what deaf international students are experiencing from the sub-Saharan Africa area and across the world.
All right, so you can see the screen here. The title of my presentation today is really what we need to consider when we're making decisions about accessibility for international students, specifically geared towards deaf and hard of hearing students. If you could move on to the next slide. Brief background regarding the Mandela Washington Fellowship for Young African Leaders, which I'll call YALI. It is a collaboration between, it's actually under the US Department of State, but it's Department of Cultural Affairs in the USA. So it is operated by an organization called INTREX, or IREX, and it is an exchange board. The agency that we partner with here at Gallaudet started this program back in 2017. The program before that, there was another program before that, the Pre-Institute, which is for fellows who are deaf and hard of hearing from sub-Saharan Africa who are coming to the US during the summer. And it is for universities all throughout the States for 6 weeks. And it's an academic program that, it's a training program for them. The fellows are deaf or hard of hearing. And before they started this program with Gallaudet, they would come and they would go to the various universities throughout the US. And most of the fellows who are deaf and hard of hearing from Africa have no idea what kind of accessibility and accommodations we offer here, what is available, what types. And I can speak from my experience growing up in sub-Saharan Africa, coming into college in the US for the first time. What I had envisioned, I had never had accessibility in sub-Saharan Africa. I never had CART transcription, never had interpreters. I never had accessibility. We just sort of go with the flow. We do whatever we can to get by. You find a friend, maybe you can copy some notes from them, and it's very limited. And that's just kind of what I became accustomed to and what I was used to. Coming into the US, the university that I went to did have an office that did deal with students who had disabilities, myself as a deaf individual included. But before I registered for classes, I went to that office. I confirmed that everything was going to work out with the interpreter. And I was like, oh, well, I don't need an interpreter. I'll just go to class and I'll just kind of write back and forth, because that's what I was accustomed to. And then over time, throughout the years, I was like, oh, you know what? Accessibility is provided. I should be taking advantage of what is available to me. The same principle kind of applies here with the fellows from sub-Saharan Africa. They come to Gallaudet University and we expose, and that is a key word here, is we expose them to the kinds of services and accessibility and accommodations that they can expect to receive in their academic leadership institute from the universities throughout the US. That is kind of the basic gist of it here. You can see just a little bit of background information about the program here at Gallaudet on the slide. The next slides will show a few different pictures from people who have been involved in the program. If you could move on to the next slide, please. Picture here just briefly is to show you. So back in 2016, this was, so a few years before the program officially started its partnership with IREX, the fellows were already involved in this back in 2015 and 2016, and it wasn't until 2017 that the official partnership began with the deaf students coming to Gallaudet. But this photo is from 2016, and there were 12 fellows who were deaf or hard of hearing, and that is a large number. If you could move on to the next slide, we just have a few more pictures. This photo here, I believe, is from 2018. Yes, it was 2018. It has the Gallaudet University president here in the blue shirt in the front. Next slide. Okay, this was the first group of fellows, 2017. Yep. That year, it just happened that all the fellows were male. Next slide. So now you just have to click a few things. It should show up. There we go. Yeah, a few more clicks. Keep going. Trying to get all of them up on the screen. Okay. Okay, so right now, just to talk through accommodations, accessibility for international deaf students. Where is the best place to even start? It's important to know who your students are. In our situation, the fellows, and I'll see the word fellows, and you'll see that because that is what our experience is, but fellows meaning students. It's important to know who your students are, what their background is, where they're coming from, because their communication preferences may be different. If you make a general assumption for deaf students that accessibility means getting a sign language interpreter, I mean, there are deaf students who run the whole gamut of what accessibility looks like for them. So that's something to keep in the back of your mind. And two key concepts here: pre-lingually and post-lingually deaf individuals. The concepts, they're just concepts to keep in mind. I know I don't have time to go into those, but just file that away for future reference. The next bullet point down is kind of the mentality of like, I can handle communication just fine on my own. And that is based on their experience in their home country where they didn't have any accessibility like we have here. And so that is something you may hear and see a deaf person saying. And what I would hope that you would do is be able to explain to them, like, you have accessibility options. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this continues from the previous points, but there are different IDEA laws throughout the US. Colleges, universities are expected to provide accommodations for students who have disabilities. If you happen to have a deaf or hard of hearing student, an international student coming into university, often the starting place for international students is the office. The international office is typically where they'll start. They don't typically go to the disability office. They typically get in touch with the student services office for international students. There is another part of the presentation, with orientation week, that students with disabilities often kind of get overlooked, and that office doesn't often show up at orientation week for the international students. So that is something that needs to be fixed. During orientation week, the Disability Services Office should be in touch with those students and going forward. So when you have the International Students Office and the Disability Services Office, they really need to form a partnership, a collaboration of some point, so that the students are aware of what services are available. The deaf students can make sure that their needs are being met. And again, I want to emphasize, needs being met does not just mean having a sign language interpreter. You can see a few different names at the bottom of my slide here, the different offices that may be responsible for the students with disabilities. At each institution, they may be named in a different way, but the concept is that they are providing accommodations and accessibility to the students with disabilities. Next slide, please. Okay, and I think for time's sake, we'll just move on to the next slide. Yeah, go ahead to the next slide. Just keeping up with this. Okay, actually, if you could go back, the other slide mentioned within the Office for Students with Disabilities, they tend to have something called an intake process, some sort of paperwork just to document the disability, what the student's needs are, so that they know how to help them. They can identify properly what sort of accommodations may fit the student best. The last point here is called reasonableness, and basically saying what is reasonable. So an interpreter might say, they might say an interpreter is the reasonable accommodation. Next slide, please. And you can see the question here. What is the most common form of accommodation service for deaf and hard of hearing students? Next, please. I think you just have to click a few times. Yeah, keep going, keep going. Okay, right. That question, a lot of people will assume, oh, so they need an interpreter. And yes, an interpreter is one type of accommodation for a deaf or hard of hearing individual, but it does not apply to all people, like I mentioned before. That is just a general assumption. Next slide, please. Keep going, keep going. You can see there's just different pictures on this slide. The pictures may be sort of self-explanatory, but the first picture shows a cart device. Often international deaf students will arrive in the US and they may not know American Sign Language yet. You cannot assume that sign language is the same all over the world. Every country, many locations even within a country have their own sign language. And just for one example, a student who is from Kenya. Student from Kenya, in Kenya, they may be completely competent in Kenyan Sign Language, but that's KSL, Kenyan Sign Language. They don't necessarily know American Sign Language. It doesn't look anything the same. They are different languages. So the student may come to the US and be okay with English, writing back and forth, reading and writing, and they sign in Kenyan Sign Language. But for accessibility in the classroom, in a lecture hall, the student doesn't know American Sign Language. The institution may put an ASL interpreter in place with American Sign Language, but the student who only knows Kenyan Sign Language won't necessarily benefit from that. There's no point. But often, a lot of students may prefer to have a cart device, which will type out the written English for them that they can read along with. So that is one option. Students may be able to use CART. They may be learning ASL. Maybe they've taken it for one semester. It really can depend. They may have more knowledge of ASL than that, but the point is they have to be comfortable with the language, and not even comfortable, but they have to have a certain level of proficiency with American Sign Language to access that communication receptively, to be able to rely on an interpreter. And at that point, they may be able to work with an American Sign Language interpreter. Often people generally assume, oh, you're deaf, let me get you an interpreter, and that does not always work. Also,
Sorry about that, Gregoire. And definitely finish your thought. I'll bring your slide back up, but just wanted to do a little time check. I think we're gonna have to wrap up here soon, but maybe you could wrap up on this last slide.
Okay, yes, sure. I will wrap up now. You don't even need to bring the slides back up. We can just leave it like this to wrap up.
Great.
The point that I want to make is generalizing the assumption that the student is deaf, let me pull in an American Sign Language interpreter, will not always work. There are different types of accessibility for deaf students. And really the key is you have to check with the student individually. Your deaf or hard of hearing student, you have to ask them, what sort of accessibility do you prefer? And sometimes they may not know. They may not know what their options are. They're like, well, what kind of accommodations can I get? I'll get whatever I can get, because maybe in their home country, they didn't have any sort of accessibility or accommodations. So it is important that you provide those options to them. Perhaps you can show them what it's like to have a CART transcript available to them. Sometimes they may need three different interpreters, trilingual interpreting happening. For example, for the student from Kenya who uses Kenyan Sign Language, you can have someone interpreting from English into ASL, someone from ASL into KSL, and the student can understand the KSL interpreter. You can have multiple interpreters going at the same time, but it is a challenge. I'm not saying it's easy. Sometimes you may need 4 interpreters, but the interpreters have to work as a team. You have 2 American Sign Language interpreters, 2 KSL interpreters for 1 student. So you've got 2 teams of 2 all working together to provide this accessibility for 1 student. It can be very challenging, but it is not impossible. Another thing that may work for hard of hearing students is an amplified device. And again, it truly depends on the individual. Deaf students are not all the same. I'll wrap it up right here. I hope the information was beneficial somehow.
Oh, hugely beneficial, Gregoire. And thank you again so much for agreeing to join us, and for your leadership and all the leadership that you provide in coordinating the orientation component for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Mandela Washington Fellows. That's such a valuable program, and it was thanks to not only leadership on your part, but also other folks at Gallaudet and at IREX and the State Department. And so it's really exciting to be able to see how those fellows are benefiting from that program, but also, these wonderful lessons that you share that any international student advisor or office can take into account when they're planning for their incoming students. Because I think there's this perception that, especially like a lot of deaf and hard of hearing students around the world even have this perception that they can only attend like Gallaudet or another university that has large deaf population. But the reality is they can attend any US institution, college, community college. And so it's really important that they know what resources there are, and for the colleges themselves to know what resources are available to them.
You're right. You're totally right. And yes, that is one thing I do want to emphasize is, yes, deaf students can go to their local community college, to another university. All universities are required to provide these accommodations. I will say Gallaudet is a different world. There is full 100% accessibility. You don't have to worry about those sort of things. So it is definitely different at Gallaudet. But thank you, Mayusa, for continuing to host and making sure that students who have disabilities, deaf and hard of hearing students, have access all over the world.
Thank you. And it was so nice to meet you, Gregoire, finally, and really thankful for this opportunity, and looking forward to more opportunities to learn from you in the future. Well, that wraps it up. Thank you so much to our interpreters and to our captioner and to all of our guest presenters. I hope you, our attendees, have been able to have some valuable takeaways from Zeynep, Justice, Jessica, and Gregoire that maybe perhaps you can incorporate into your existing international student orientations, or maybe what they shared will give you some ideas for creating some kind of supplemental resources or orientation or introduction. So please stay in touch with Mobility International USA and our project, the National Clearinghouse on Disability and Exchange, so that we can provide you with help answer your questions or connect you to any resources that you might need to help your students succeed. Thanks so much.